Longest Day is a podcast from a female-founded destination practice that believes that crisis isn't an if, it's a when. We are an organisation unafraid of crisis, but have never known one to be resolved in a single day. However long the day or night that gave rise to the crisis in the first place, there's always something we can learn. I'm Leah, the founder and CEO of Broadstairs Consulting, a problem-solving consultancy offering crisis and governance advisory services to help leaders and organisations thrive and flourish. We operate in the gap between legal and public relations, at the coalface of difficult situations, believing that most crises are avoidable and the impact of inevitable ones usually can be mitigated. Our guests have overcome a litany of crises. Many of our guests have worked with us in some capacity in the past. All of them have stories worth hearing. We trust them to make this worth your while. We hope it helps you trust us. Today's guest is Chris Paouros. She is a consultant, advisor, charity trustee, and non-executive director. Chris is the former group general manager of SHM, a global specialist provider of business services. She's a lifelong Tottenham Hotspurs fan, anti-discrimination activist and campaigner, and she believes football can be a positive force for social and cultural transformation. She founded and co-chairs Spurs' official LGBTQ+ supporters group, Proud Lily Whites. Chris sits on the FA Inclusion Advisory Board, is a Premier League Pledis panel member, and is the chair of the board of the Women's Equality Party. We're delighted she has joined us on The Longest Day. Please note that this episode contains content that may be alarming to some listeners, as there will be mentions of death and suicide. Discretion is advised. Well, Chris, I know you've been thinking about your longest day for some time.
The one thing that really that's really shaped my work in the last 9 years, I guess, is my wife dying. Unexpectedly, I came home one day, went to work one day, came back and she wasn't there. You know what I mean? So I guess that's not like an immediate crisis, except it was a crisis because obviously it was a crisis, but it was an ongoing crisis. But that's completely changed my life, obviously.
And so how did this, I suppose your longest day, how did that play out?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, when it was the longest day, I'd probably say it was a long year. I can't really remember the first year. So I was here at work and Monica had a bad day at her work and had left work and said, I think, she was like, I think I've been fired. I think I've quit. I can't decide, but she'd left work. And then she messaged me to say that she'd gone to the pub. Fine, she'd gone to the pub. And I had a call at 3:00, I think it was, or 3:30. And I was planning on doing that call and going home because I thought, I'll go home because she's obviously had a bad day. And then that call got moved to 6. So I was like, oh, and I should have gone home. Now I think about it, I should have gone home to do the call, but I didn't. So I went home at 6. I park the car at the back, come through the garden into the living room, and her keys were in the door. So I couldn't get in, couldn't reach her, and I was ringing her on the way home. I couldn't reach her, and I went round the front, I think, and the chain was on the door. So I didn't know what to do. So then I remembered that I've got a key on my key ring there's a little sort of, I think you call it a side return. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that until I've got a friend who's been obsessed with her side return and getting it renovated and building onto it. So I've heard all about side returns now. Anyway, I went down there and I opened the door and I could hear me. Anyway, I got there and she decided that she didn't want to live anymore. And so from that moment, there's very little I can remember. I can remember a lot. I actually remember everything and nothing. So I can remember every detail of those moments. I remember very, very little of the days and weeks after. So from a crisis perspective, I was in crisis. But I guess I was very lucky in the sense that because I'd been here at SHM for such a long time and had built this business and had hired everybody here, and had built a great team that were doing great work, is that, you know, and it was a small team, there's probably about 40 people at the time. Everyone, I guess, you know, for want of a better word, rallied. So there wasn't any question of you know, like what I was doing or what I had to do the next day or whatever. But I think what's interesting now, if I look at it sort of in the rearview mirror, now that I've left SHM and I work for myself, I think about the things that I do, I think it gave me the opportunity to go, okay, these are the things that I'm really good at. These are the things that I can really add value to. And these are the things I'm going to spend my time doing now rather than everything. And I know that sounds, you know, as the general manager of this business, which I know sounds like it's a factory, it's not. I was basically the MD. And when you build something, sometimes it's hard not to do everything. Now, I'm pleased to say, and I hope everybody would agree with me, I wasn't a micromanager, but I did have my finger in every pie, and I paid a lot of attention to detail. And I think it stood the business in good stead. And actually, if I talk to some of the people that I've worked with over the years, I irritated them a lot, but they would always thank me for it in the end. So, and, you know, and I think it's an interesting thing now that we work in a different way, is how you do that immediate feedback, really think about, okay, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do it well? And do that work when you're sitting alongside someone, particularly when people aren't in offices, etc. And you're trying to do things by email or trying to do things by Slack or trying to do stuff via WhatsApp. You know, it makes me feel like a bit of a dinosaur when I want to have a conversation about something.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But I'm okay with that, because actually at the end of that, particularly if it's with people who are at an earlier stage in their career, I want to afford them some of the generosity that people I worked with afforded me. And I don't necessarily want to lose that. So in terms of a longest day, I think that was a long year, but it shaped, as I say, it shaped how I work.
We talk a lot about preparedness in a crisis, and obviously there is nothing that can prepare you for that kind of experience. What career elements enabled you to keep going? Was it just this movement that you were building in a variety of contexts, or was it something else that you had kind of schooled along the way of your career in yourself?
I've got a profound sense of responsibility. There's a profound sense of responsibility because I care about, what I'm able to deliver, but also what I'm able to help other people with. But also, when you've got in the back of your head, we came here with nothing and we've done what we can, it's like I'm constantly thinking, well, I don't want to disappoint them. And, I've got to make sure that we never find ourselves in that situation again. That responsibility gets passed down, I suppose. I look at my nephews now, I don't have children. They haven't got a clue. But that's fine. That's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to not pass that on to your children.
One of the things that strikes me from your profound sense of responsibility is that there was an internal drive to keep going for those reasons. What would it have looked like to give yourself grace as a leader to manage that personal crisis without that sense of burden for the running of the business and the other organisations in the background?
Well, I think I did, actually. And the organisations in the background were all... Then the only thing was the Proud Lily Whites. All the stuff that I've been doing has been since, and I don't think that's a coincidence. So I think I did give myself that grace, but I genuinely can't. I think probably because it was so traumatic, my brain doesn't let me I can't remember. But I definitely wasn't here every day, right? But I did do some stuff. But all I know is, and that I guess what I'm really proud of, is that, I ran this business on a day-to-day basis. I was here at before 7 o'clock in the morning and I'd leave at 7 o'clock at night. And I was proud that it ran really well after I left. Oh, sorry, not after I left, but like once I was sort of here and sort of not here. And I think actually that's probably surprising, because I think what you think as a leader often is, oh, if I'm not here, the whole thing's going to fall apart. And actually, your job is to ensure that it doesn't fall apart if you're not there. And it didn't, which is great. And look, there are other excellent, senior people as well, who I'm sure took some burden. I know I would have done the same for them, and they know that as well. Also, we all care about this business, so we wanted to make sure that that it worked.
We'll be right back after this advert from our sponsor. This episode of The Longest Day is sponsored by Grosvenor Search, a specialist NED recruiter in the asset management space. Board diversity shouldn't be reducible to tokenism. Rather, efforts to diversify boards must be focused on ensuring that the top 5% of talent are identified, and once recruited, empowered to strengthen existing boards. Grosvenor Search offers a targeted approach to ensure that your board receives the most impressive diverse talent. For more information, email info@grosvenorsearch.com. Let's get back to today's guest.
I wanted to take a segue into how sports is political. You represent a political organisation. These two areas have crises all the time.
Yeah.
How have your public and private life experiences helped you to manage some of those crises when they emerge?
I think this is going to sound really trite, so forgive me, and I'll talk about it. But honestly, don't sweat the small stuff. And it sounds really obvious, but honestly, some of the things that, and I still find myself doing it, and I have to stop myself, because there are some things that, so what really is a crisis, I guess, is the first thing. Like, what really is a crisis? What's actually going to happen to people or to bits of work or whatever on the basis of this thing that's gone wrong, really? And it's the people that are the most important thing. So I worry much more about someone forgetting to do the payroll or not paying someone's expenses than I would from there being some kind of comms error that's happened on your social media or whatever. And that's the thing that people spend loads of money on, is thinking about what the crisis comms is around someone doing something stupid on social media or someone's or whatever. It's like, it doesn't matter. What's that affecting your brand? Okay, in the end, if your brand is affected, it might affect depending on the size of the business, it might affect your ability to deliver something, or you might lose clients, which in the end can affect your people. But ultimately, it's the people that matter, really. I think about Monica, all the time, and it was like a bad work. Look, there are a number of things that are, there, and I genuinely think that it was like a mad half an hour, but it was a really bad work day that triggered it. Is that worth it? No. Like, not in a million years. And so I think as a leader, you have to think about that. And I'm not suggesting that you tread on eggshells around people. Of course not. But ultimately, it's like, what are you asking of people? Is it reasonable? How are you... What's the... I think the... just have to be people at the centre of everything. And I think that... And therefore focus on that. And if you focus on the people, and sometimes people say to me, and I've had this millions of times, it's like, well, actually, we should be thinking about what we're delivering and not about the people. Was too internally focused. What about the external? It's like, guess what? Who's doing the delivery? Who's doing the delivery of anything? Whether you're a barista or I don't know, a knowledge, one of these knowledge workers out here, people who sit there and come up with stuff out of their brains all the time.
I think one of the things leaders really struggle to do is embody that. So I think people can see the import of it. I think people can desire it. I think people can commission culture reviews to obtain it. But it seems to be that the ability to capture it is contingent on having a culture of people who are all moving in the same direction. As a leader, how have you managed to harness that in an expanding business over many, many years in a way that the employees that started at the beginning to the employees you have now are still equally engaged?
There are behaviours that you can try to develop as a leader, or at least things to be deliberate about in order to ensure that you're people focused. And I think, I talk a lot about inclusive leadership, and that's really important. Because I think that, you could talk about, I know it's kind of simple stuff in the, for anybody who's thought about this, you could talk about diversity, great. You could have a diverse workforce, whether that's in terms of race and ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, disability, etc. Great. Is it equitable? I'm not talking about equal, I'm talking about equitable. Has everyone got what they need to deliver what they're doing? Again, all great, but if you're not espousing inclusive leadership, it doesn't matter. Because you can say, yeah, good, look at all of this. But you have to be an inclusive leader to get the best out of your people. And I think I read something once, I can't remember what the people are called. I'll look it up and I'll tell you so you can. But they had like the 6 traits of an inclusive leader. And I think it really resonated with me, so it stuck in my mind. The first is visible commitment. So be really deliberate about it. And when I say visible, whether that's visible or audible, be really deliberate about your commitment to it and make it a personal priority. You have to be humble. You have to show humility about your own capabilities. I can't do everything. There are always going to be people that I work with who can do different, who can do different things to me, and we work together to do that. And also admitting your mistakes is really important, because then don't create a culture of fear or difficulty or people hiding stuff, because actually you can do that too, and then everyone's got the space to contribute. Really important. You have to be aware of your own bias. And honestly, that one's really hard, because when you're a leader, you think, I'm the senior person, I can't admit anything, I can't admit any mistakes. So we're back to your humility. But actually, we have all got bias. We've all grown up in patriarchy, white supremacy, ableism, and we carry it with us all the time. The best analogy I ever heard of that is a fly doesn't know it's in a bottle until you've released it. So we're all in this bottle of patriarchy, white supremacy, ableism. We come out of the bottle, we go, oh, wow, okay, right, that's what that was. And you have to unpick it every single day. Mm-hmm. Every single day. I've been calling myself feminist since I was 17. That's many years, more than 30, right? And I still find myself sometimes, someone said something to me about their doctor the other day, and I said, couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And I talk about this stuff. So let alone stuff around, white supremacy and racism. I like to think of myself as an active anti-racist, but I have to work hard at it every day. I first did a course on race in my undergraduate in my second year. That was 30 years ago. But, it takes time. So you have to be aware of your bias, and then also understand whatever systems that you're building, that you're not building bias into those systems. That's 3, isn't it? Be curious about other people. And we spend a lot of time running around like trying to just, operationalise things. Actually having that moment of curiosity about others, about your colleagues, can really help to, in the end, sort of deliver that work. And then, you know, whether it's listening without judgment, having that empathy, etc. This one sounds quite grand, but as I say, I'm remembering these 6 things from the people that I'm going to send you the name of in a bit. It was cultural intelligence. Now, look, I don't know if I'm culturally intelligent, but I do my best, and that's not just about your kind of, whether it's culture in terms of someone's you know, ethnic background. You know, it's like, you know, there's all sorts of things that kind of build our the cultures that we've kind of grown up in. So to have some kind of sort of sympathy and empathy there. And then the last thing has got to be collaboration. You know, if I look at it here at SHA, it was very funny actually. There was one time, and this was, you know, in the early 2000s, where I sat down with the chief executive and we were like, should we take everyone's computer away? Because actually, when you're out there being when you're doing consulting business, the only time you need a computer really is if you're writing a report. The rest of the time, you need like a big. We're in a room with like a wipe away wall here, just to do the work and do the thinking together, and then write an email. At that time, everyone had a BlackBerry. It's like fine, they can have their BlackBerries, and then you can have a computer when you've got something to write. Now we didn't do that because everyone freaked out, but actually that's going to be much more useful than sitting by yourself to do something. You have to collaborate. That was a very long answer.
I think that is incredibly helpful though, and insightful. You have been a very vocal and strong advocate for increasing female and LGBTQ plus representation and participation in sports at all levels. What do you think needs to be done to achieve greater equity in sports?
I mean, we could do a 3-hour seminar on this, so bear with. I think, look, the really important thing here is there are 2 things. One, if you think about participation, we know that mental health, particularly for the LGBTQ plus community, is, you know, there is a crisis, right? And we know how good sport is for your mental health. Mm-hmm. Now, you have an issue with a lot of sport is kind of wrapped up in particularly participation in sport, is wrapped up in gendered stereotypes. So that's where we can come in about talking about women in sport as well. So the LGBTQ plus community don't feel like they can take part. And you've got a public health and a mental health crisis around that. So we've got to do something about that. And then I think about being a fan. And, you know, the Proud Lily Whites is a fan group. I still remember walking up those steps and seeing the pitch for the first time and just being blown away at how kind of vibrant the green grass was, how there were like thousands of people there who all had there was that crackle of excitement in the air. And I still feel it now. And that feeling you get as the ball's flying through the air and about to hit the back of the net, where everyone rises at the same time, or there's the same sharp intake of breath, and that same release when the ball hits the net. It's like nothing else in that terms of that collective with like, it was 36,000 people, now it's 62, right? And it's incredible, whether that's about, you know, that sense of community and belonging. And I don't want to deny that to anybody, which is why I think the proliferation of women's football is incredible for all of those reasons, which is why I think that having LGBTQ plus fan groups in now more than 50 football clubs up and down the country. When we started, there was us and 3 others. I think it's so important because I don't want to deny that to anybody. And as much as we can do to ensure that LGBTQ plus football fans feel like they belong, then that really matters. But actually, if you think of like last year, homophobic hate crime increased by 42% in England and Wales. Transphobic hate crime increased by 56% in England and Wales. And we know that what gets reported is just the tip of the iceberg. And then you look at like the vitriol on social media, it's like we've still got work to do. So if we can use football as a force for good to try and combat some of that, and in the meantime, bring people back to football, I realised that actually it is for me. You know, there's so many gay men in our group who fell out of love with the game as they were coming to terms with their sexual orientation. Because of these gender stereotypes, it's like they felt like football wasn't for them. Not because they had issues with, what their identity was, but like going, actually, football feels like this. It feels like this kind of real kind of masculinity, a certain kind of masculinity where I wouldn't feel safe. Well, actually, they can be, and they know they can be. And I think that's really, really important. We have to be fully intersectional in all of the work that we do. Because when I talk about homophobia, it doesn't travel alone. It's often with its mates, racism, Islamophobia, transphobia, disableism, etc. And so we have to do the work together.
I'm a huge proponent of intersectionality, but I'm a firm believer that intersectionality is hungry work. And working at the forefront of a lot of these topics and with such a wide range of stakeholders to impact change is also hungry work. And so we at Broadstairs Consulting would really love to know what food
literally hungry
your work.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I like food. For those of you who can't see me, I look like I like food too. I mean, it's hard to pick anything, but I think if I'm going to pick something, it has to be my mum's food. So Cypriot food. But I think that, if I'm not going to be there so I can make up my plate, I think that, you go to any Cypriot bakery, you'll see halloumobites and yobites. So what you've got are like nice little breads with like halloumi and mint, or nice little breads with olives and onions and mint. So yeah, I think, like a couple of those are always in my, in the freezer, so you can whip them out at any time. And I'm also a huge fan, and again, because it reminds me of my granddad, of pomegranate.
Thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed the conversation, and so many of your experiences are inspirational, that goes without saying. But I think just so useful for the next generation coming up, people who are interested in getting involved in some of the areas of activism that you are working in. But there's also so much for existing leaders to learn, especially in the topic of DE&I, and also, of course, in the area of LGBTQ+. So thank you again for your time.
It's a pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
You've been listening to a Broadstairs Consulting Limited podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Tune in soon to hear the next instalment of The Longest Day. Copyright 2023. Production copyright Broadstairs Consulting Limited. All rights reserved.